Welcome back to Too Lazy to Read. The place we dig into those books, you wish you had time for.
Right. So many great books, so little time.
Well, this time our deep dive takes us into The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. This book, it's really changed how people think about trauma.
Yeah, it's not just something in your head. This book shows how trauma gets into your body, how it changes everything, really. Emotions, your relationships, even how you see the world.
It's pretty amazing, right?
And the thing is, van der Kolk is like the expert on trauma. He's done so much research,
Right.
decades of it, but he explains it all in a way that anyone can understand.
That's what makes it such a powerful book.
It's not just facts and figures. He really shows you how trauma becomes part of who you are.
And even other big researchers, people like Stephen Porges, they praise the book for that.
Yeah, Porges talks about how the body keeps the score, focuses on both understanding and healing, which is so important because, well, trauma is a lot more common than we might think.
And those statistics from the CDC, they're kind of shocking, aren't they?
Definitely. When you see that so many Americans have been through some kind of trauma.
Like sexual abuse, violence, or even growing up around alcoholism.
It really hits you how this isn't some rare thing.
It's like almost everyone's life is touched by trauma in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's this ripple effect, right? Trauma doesn't just stay with the person who went through it directly.
Right. Think about soldiers coming home from war.
They have these invisible wounds.
And those wounds, they affect their families, their friends, even their whole community can feel it.
It's like the book uses these examples to show just how big the impact of trauma really is.
It's powerful stuff.
It really is. So, it's not just the soldier who's changed. It's their spouse who might have to deal with their anger, or their kids who, jump at every little sound because it reminds them of something bad.
Right.
But how does that actually happen? Something happened years ago, but it still has this hold on someone's body. How is that possible?
Okay, imagine you're in a situation, a really dangerous one. It's life or death. Your body, it floods with these hormones, things like adrenaline, cortisol.
Like the fight or flight response.
Exactly. Now, for most people, that calms down once the danger's gone.
Right.
But for people who've been through trauma, that intense physical reaction can stick around.
Oh, wow.
They're in this constant state of being on guard, like the danger could come back any second.
So even when they're safe, their body is acting like they're still in danger.
Exactly. It's like their body's stuck in emergency mode.
Right.
And the book talks about how this constant stress, it really messes with the brain, especially parts like the amygdala and this other part, the medial prefrontal cortex.
Okay, those are brain regions.
Yeah, so the amygdala, think of it as your brain's alarm system.
Okay.
Well, with trauma, that alarm system is going off all the time. It's scanning for threats constantly.
Makes sense.
But then you have the medial prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to help you think clearly about situations. That part gets weaker with trauma.
So it's like one part of the brain is saying danger all the time, and the other part, the part that says, hold on, is this really dangerous? That part isn't working as well.
Right. So there's this imbalance where fear and anxiety take over. It becomes really hard to control your emotions.
So when people say someone needs to just get over a trauma, it's just not that simple.
Not at all.
Their brain is literally wired to see danger everywhere.
The book really helps us understand that and why talk therapy, just talking about it, might not be enough for some people.
Yeah, their body's still holding on to the trauma, even if their mind wants to let go.
It's like they're disconnected.
And that leads to that whole idea of mind and body being separate. Right?
Yeah, and the book talks about how some people who've been through trauma, they can tell you what happened, but it's like they're reading a script. There's no emotion there.
It's strange, but it makes sense in a way, like they've shut down their feelings to protect themselves.
It is a defense mechanism. And van der Kolk actually talks about brain scans, images of what's happening in the brain. They show that in people who've had trauma, the parts of the brain that handle feelings, they're less active.
So their brains have basically learned to numb themselves.
They had to survive. But it comes with a price.
Because you don't just numb the bad stuff, right?
Sadly, no.
You numb everything. Joy, excitement, all of it. I can see how that would make it really hard to live in the moment, to really experience life.
The book makes a really important point about that.
What's that?
Real recovery. It's not just about forgetting what happened or not reacting to it.
It's more than that.
It's about coming back to your body, feeling safe being you, and feeling all the emotions, the good ones too.
That makes me think about what it means to feel alive. So much of a good life is about joy, love, connection. If trauma takes that away, it's not just a wound from the past.
Sure, right.
It's affecting your present and your future.
And that's where it gets really interesting when the book talks about trauma in childhood.
Because that's when you're supposed to learn about safety, about trusting the world. What happens when trauma disrupts that?
Right. It makes you wonder about how we form attachments, how those early relationships shape who we become.
Okay, so let's get into that. The book talks about attachment theory being super important for understanding the impact of childhood trauma. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. Attachment theory, this guy named John Bowlby really pioneered it. He looked at how, even as babies, we have this deep need to bond with people who make us feel safe, our caregivers.
It makes sense.
And it's not just about physical needs like food and shelter. It's about feeling seen, understood, comforted.
So if a kid's needs are met consistently, they develop what's called a secure attachment.
Exactly. But what happens when that doesn't happen? When there's neglect, abuse, inconsistency?
Yeah, what then?
Kolk explains how that leads to different attachment styles, ones that aren't so secure. Like, maybe a child learns to shut down their needs because they've learned that relying on others only leads to disappointment.
That's so sad.
It is. That's called avoidant attachment. Or maybe they're constantly worrying about being abandoned because their caregiver was unpredictable. That's anxious attachment.
And then there's disorganized attachment,
Yeah.
right? The book talked about that being the most severe, often seen in kids who've been abused or neglected.
That one's tough.
It makes sense, though, right? If the person you're supposed to feel safe with is also the one who hurts you, that would be incredibly confusing.
It creates so much inner turmoil.
And these early attachment patterns, they can really stick with you.
They can. They affect your relationships, how you manage your emotions, even how you see yourself.
Wow.
And that brings us to this idea that Kolk is really passionate about, developmental trauma disorder.
This is where the book challenges how we usually diagnose and treat trauma, especially in kids.
Exactly.
So what's he saying?
He's saying that the way we do things now, where a kid might get labeled with different things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, it misses the bigger picture.
Oh, I see.
He thinks these are often symptoms that come from one core issue, the developmental disruption caused by early trauma.
So instead of just treating the individual symptoms,
He's saying, treat the root cause, the trauma itself.
that makes a lot of sense.
Right. He even proposes specific criteria for this developmental trauma disorder. It focuses on things like difficulty controlling emotions, problems with impulse control, and struggles in relationships.
So it's a more holistic approach.
Exactly. It's about understanding how trauma has affected the child's entire development, not just putting Band-Aids on different problems.
And that could lead to much more effective treatment.
It could. And speaking of addressing the pain, the book talks about how important it is for people who've been through trauma to have a safe place to talk about it.
To tell their story.
Yeah. Whether it's with a therapist or in a support group like AA or NA, even just with a friend or family member they trust, being able to talk about what happened is huge for healing.
You know, it makes me think of that quote by Anton Chekhov. He said, "Man will become better when you show him what he is like." I like that. There's something powerful about bringing things out into the open,
Right.
acknowledging what happened.
Both for ourselves and for other people who might be going through something similar.
Exactly. So the book takes us next into exploring how people heal. And Kolk outlines a bunch of different approaches.
And they all start with recognizing that trauma affects us on so many levels: mind, body, and spirit.
Right. So let's break these approaches down. Kolk talks about top-down, medication and technology-based, and bottom-up. What does all that mean?
Okay, so top-down methods, they focus on dealing with those traumatic memories directly, trying to make sense of them.
So that might be talk therapy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where you explore your thoughts and feelings about what happened. Or maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps you challenge negative thought patterns.
So it's like using the power of your mind to reframe those traumatic experiences.
You got it. But then there's the body. We've been talking about how trauma gets stuck there too.
Right. So how do you address that?
That's where the bottom-up approaches come in. They acknowledge that trauma is stored in the body. So to heal, you got to work directly with physical sensations and movement.
And that's where we get into some really interesting therapies, right?
Yeah.
The book talked about things like EMDR, internal family systems, and psychomotor therapy. Can you tell us more about those?
Of course. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It uses this thing called bilateral stimulation, usually eye movements,
Okay.
and it helps your brain process traumatic memories.
So what happens is when something traumatic happens, the memory gets stuck in the emotional part of your brain,
It does.
and that causes flashbacks, nightmares, all that.
Right. And EMDR helps to kind of unlock and reprocess those memories, make them less intense emotionally.
It's like giving your brain a second chance to file those memories away properly.
I like that, yeah.
So then what about internal family systems? That one sounds super interesting.
It is. IFS sees the mind as being made up of different parts, and each part has its own perspective and role.
Like different voices in your head.
Yeah, exactly. It's like your inner world is a family with different members, some more mature than others.
Okay.
And when we go through trauma, certain parts can get weighed down by the pain and fear from those experiences.
Makes sense. Like we all have these different voices inside us, and trauma can make the scared, angry, or ashamed ones really loud.
Exactly. And IFS helps you identify those parts, figure out why they're doing what they're doing, and create a more peaceful and whole sense of self.
It's like making peace with all the different parts of yourself.
Exactly. And then there's psychomotor therapy, which uses movement and physical experience to help you get back in touch with your body.
I've heard a bit about that. It sounds very hands-on.
It is. It could involve structured exercises, role playing, even just paying attention to your breath and how your body feels in space.
Okay.
The idea is that by working with physical sensations and movement, you can release trapped emotions and develop a stronger sense of self.
It's like giving your body a voice to tell its story.
I like that.
So these bottom-up therapies, they're all about recognizing that healing isn't just mental, it's physical too.
Right.
We need to work with our bodies, not just our minds.
Exactly. It's wild how the book even gets into how our cells, hold on to trauma.
Real?
Yeah, Kolk gets into the science of it all, explaining how things that happen to us can actually change how our genes work. And that affects our health in the long run.
That's where things went from interesting to, mind-blowing for me. It's one thing to say you feel stressed, but to know that trauma can change how my genes operate?
Right.
That's crazy.
It shows just how deep trauma goes, not just mental or emotional, but biological.
Wow.
And that makes the whole conversation about treatment even more important, because if we're not just dealing with, surface stuff, but things that could affect your health for years to come.
We need to find ways to heal that work, right?
Absolutely.
And you mentioned earlier that Kolk talks about using medication as part of treatment. I think some people might be surprised by that.
Do you think so?
Because medication is often seen as a way to just cover up the problem, not really solve it.
I get that. It's a common misconception. And the book addresses that head on. Kolk says medication isn't a magic bullet, but it can help some people.
Okay.
He explains how certain meds can help balance brain chemistry, reduce anxiety, and help people sleep better. And those things are super important if you're going to start the real work of healing.
So it's not about erasing the trauma. It's about helping someone get to a place where they can actually start to recover.
Exactly. You got to create the right conditions. And along with medication, he talks about new technologies like neurofeedback, which is pretty amazing.
Okay, tell me more about that. How does neurofeedback even work? And what does it have to do with treating trauma?
Okay, so imagine you can see your brain waves, in real time, like a mirror showing you what your brain is doing.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That's basically what neurofeedback does. It uses these sensors to track your brainwave patterns and then gives you feedback, like through sounds or visuals, to help you learn to control your brain activity.
So it's like brain training.
Kinda like physical therapy, but for your brain. You learn to strengthen certain neural pathways and calm down others, and over time, you get more control over your emotions and how you react to things.
I like that, like you're rewiring your brain.
Exactly. And what's really exciting is how they're using neurofeedback to help people who've had trauma feel safer and calmer, even in situations that normally would trigger anxiety or flashbacks.
That's amazing. So we've got these clinical approaches, but the book also goes into some unexpected ways to heal, like using theater.
Right. That was one of the chapters that really surprised me.
Me too. I never would have thought of theater as a way to help people recover from trauma.
But Kolk makes a good case for it. He talks about how in ancient Greece, they used tragedies, plays, to help soldiers returning from war.
Oh, wow.
It helped them process what they'd been through and find their way back into society.
So they knew, even way back then, that art could be healing.
It seems so. And it wasn't just about sitting there and watching. These plays gave people a place to come together, share their emotions, think about what they'd been through, and find meaning in their pain.
It's a reminder that people have been dealing with trauma forever, and maybe we can learn something from how they coped back then.
Exactly. And Kolk brings it into the present day with examples like this project called Theater of War.
Okay, what's that?
This guy, Brian Duaries, he uses readings of these ancient Greek plays, but with military communities.
Oh, interesting.
It opens up conversations about the things that happen in war, the invisible wounds,
So it's a way for veterans and their families to connect and talk about their experiences.
and hopefully start to heal together. It's like theater gives them a language to express emotions that are hard to talk about.
I see. So then Van der Kolk also talks about how rhythm and movement can help people recover from trauma, right?
He does, and it might sound kind of weird at first.
Like drumming circles, dancing, chanting.
Yeah, things that seem more like fun than therapy.
Right.
But he explains how powerful these things can be.
Okay, how so?
They can help calm your nervous system, let go of pent-up energy, and create a sense of connection with other people.
It makes sense when you think about how trauma can make you feel isolated, like you're cut off from yourself and everyone else.
Exactly. And he brings in the work of this historian, William H. McNeill, who studied rhythm and movement throughout history.
Okay.
McNeill thought that moving together in sync creates a kind of bond, a muscular bonding, he called it,
Interesting.
and that strengthens social ties and gives people a sense of shared purpose.
It's like we're hardwired to connect with each other, and these rhythmic activities tap into that.
I think so.
Like we need to move together, breathe together, feel like we belong.
Right. And that leads into one of the biggest takeaways from the book, the idea of trauma-informed communities.
What does that mean exactly?
It means taking everything we're learning about how to heal from trauma and applying it to the bigger picture,
Oh, I see.
creating a world that's more understanding and supportive of people who've been through trauma.
So it's about moving beyond just treating individuals and creating environments that help everyone heal and become more resilient.
Exactly. Van der Kolk says we got to move past those individual treatment models and make places where everyone feels supported.
Like our schools and workplaces.
Yeah. And even our justice system and healthcare systems, it's a big change.
It is. But imagine if instead of asking, what's wrong with you,
Yeah.
we asked, what happened to you?
That's a powerful shift.
It takes the blame and shame away and replaces it with understanding and support.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that trauma isn't a personal weakness. It's something that happens to people. And creating a trauma-informed world means making spaces where people feel safe enough to talk about what happened, to ask for help, and to be with others who get it.
It's about building a culture of compassion, empathy, and resilience.
And that brings us back to that message of hope that's woven through the whole book.
It really is a hopeful book, isn't it?
It is. The Body Keeps the Score isn't just about trauma. It's about healing, about how strong the human spirit is, how we can overcome even the toughest things and find a way to be whole.
It reminds us that even when we're broken, we can still heal, grow, and find a way to live a life that has meaning.
And that's what makes it such an important book. It shows us just how resilient we are and encourages us to create a world where everyone can heal.
I love that. It makes you think, like, how can we take these ideas about trauma and make them part of our own lives?
Yeah,
Not just like big societal changes, but just how we treat each other every day.
absolutely. We can all be more aware of trauma in our relationships with friends, family, at work, even with people we don't know.
Right.
It starts with simple things like really listening to someone, not judging them, remembering that everyone's going through something.
It's about making people feel safe to be themselves.
Exactly.
And sometimes it just means being there for someone, offering support, not trying to fix things or give advice they didn't ask for.
You got it.
You know, one of the things that really stuck with me from the book is that healing doesn't mean forgetting about the trauma.
It's true.
It's not about pretending it didn't happen.
No.
It's about figuring out how to make those experiences part of your life
Yeah.
in a way that lets you move forward
And become even stronger and wiser.
and more compassionate.
Yes.
Remember that metaphor of the shattered vase?
Oh, yeah.
Where you take all the broken pieces and put them back together?
Beautiful metaphor.
It makes something new and beautiful.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even when we're broken, we can heal and be whole again.
We can. And it takes time. It's a journey, not a quick fix.
Yeah. There'll be good days and bad days, setbacks, breakthroughs. But what matters is to keep going,
One step at a time.
one step at a time, and find those things that help us connect with our bodies, our emotions, who we are.
And to remember that we're not alone in this. There are people who care, resources to help, and always hope.
Always hope.
The Body Keeps the Score is such a powerful book. It gives us this roadmap for understanding trauma and healing.
It does.
It can really change how you see things, how you understand yourself and other people.
It might even inspire you to get involved in making the world a more trauma-informed place.
I hope so.
I think it will. It's a book everyone should read. It's about how strong the human spirit is and how, even after the worst things, we can heal and find wholeness.
So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by everything we've talked about, or if you just want to learn more, I really encourage you to check out The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk.
It's an amazing book.
It's a journey, and it will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
It will.
And remember, healing is possible. There is hope, there's help, and you don't have to do this alone.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into The Body Keeps the Score. We hope you found it helpful and encouraging. Don't forget to subscribe to Too Lazy to Read for more deep dives into books that matter.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, keep learning and keep growing.